Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Buffalo SportsCenter. I am Don, and today we are going to predict the Buffalo Sabres opening night lineup for this upcoming 2023-24 season. But before I do that, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe here on the YouTube channel. That can get more Sabres fans pushed towards this video, get the YouTube algorithm on our side, as well as following Buffalo Sports Center on Instagram and joining the BSC Discord. All three of those links are down in the description down below. Now, I did say we were going to predict some lineups, and yes, we are. Transition to the new screen. Here we go. Beautiful. I know. And boom. First group we're going to talk about are the forwards. And I say that the Sabres actually, will be going with 13 forwards for this upcoming season. Now, I feel like the forward group is probably the least controversial of any of the groups so far. There's going to be not as much difference in opinions as to who should be making the opening night lineup. So I have Jeff Skinner, Tage Thompson, Alex Tuch on the first line. That is a given. They performed very well, except when Tage Thompson was dragged down due to injuries. During that time, during the latter part of this past season, we saw Casey Middlestat transition into the first-line center role, which he actually performed well. And I would not be surprised if we saw Middlestat on that first-line center spot come opening night. But I'm going to play it safe here, put Middlestat on the second line next to Dylan Cousins and Victor Olofsson. Now, Olofsson, of course, he is stepping in for the injured Jack Quinn. Jack Quinn usually would be in that top 6 spot, and I had a really tough time. I was really back and forth between putting Victor Olofsson on the second line or JJ Peterka. In the end, I went with Olofsson mainly because he provides a little more streaky goal scoring, and it's very easy to transition him down lower into the lineup if you want to flex up Peterka or something after a couple games into the season. And then on the third line, I have Jordan Greenway, Peyton Krebs, and JJ Peterka. Peterka should at least start the season out with reduced minutes, even though I thought he did perform pretty decently at the end of last season. There's still some consistency issues that I'm concerned with Peterka, but that is usually what happens with a young player like him, and it'll be good for him to be put next to a couple of defensive-minded forwards. Well, I wouldn't say Greenway is totally defensively minded. Krebs more so, yes. And Jordan Greenway, I don't think Greenway performed very well after he got traded over to the Sabres from the Wild after the deadline last season. So this is certainly a good opportunity for him to get another training camp under his belt, feel a little more settled. Maybe we can see Greenway go up to the top line at some point. I know Don Granato really likes him. He was playing around, trying to see where Greenway fits into the overall puzzle, so don't think he will be staying at the same position for very long, as I don't think Peterka will be on the third line very long. But this is the beauty, isn't it? That the Sabres can just move players back and forth like they're chess pieces, and the overall scoring and the depth doesn't get worse. In past seasons, you were forced to stay with the top 6. Those were your top 6 players. And this year, the Sabres have depth. They have options. They can do whatever they want. And that is really good if you're a team trying to make the playoffs. Now, we go into probably the most difficult part to predict for the forward group, and that is the fourth line here. You have Zemgus Girgensons. I have Tyson Jost as the fourth line center, and then Kyle Okposo on the right wing. Girgensons and Okposo were two of the best defensive forwards in the league this past season, even though they don't get the credit that I think they deserve. I really liked how Girgensons and Okposo both played, especially as the Sabres were making their playoff push this past season. Okposo had some huge, big goals. I remember that one game against the New York Islanders where he scored the only open play goal from that game. The other one was an empty net scored, I think, by Skinner. But I really liked how Kyle Okposo finished this past season out. Now, he could be easily substituted in with the extra forward, and that would be Lucas Rusek. I really like Rusek. He looked phenomenal in his one game played against the Montreal Canadiens. He's on the older end of Sabres prospects. Rusek definitely has the experience at the AHL level, and he's had enough time to season so that he can transition into being a full-time NHL player. And it was really difficult to go with Rusek, but of all the prospects, of all of the players, the bubble players that are with the Sabres, Rusek definitely has the most defensive upside, and he has the best profile of a fourth line winger. And like I said, he could easily substitute in for Kyle Poso. Now let's keep on moving to the defense now. I have 7 defenders suiting up for the Sabres on opening night. And the top pairing, pretty self-explanatory, Rasmus Dahlin and Mattias Samuelsson. Now, there has been some talk over Samuelsson maybe being pushed further down the lineup to try to even out some of the pairings a little bit, but why fix something that ain't broke? Samuelsson and Dahlin perform well together. Dahlin jumps into play, and while Dahlin is defensively responsible now, I think he just likes to have that support of Samuelsson, who he knows will sit behind him and eat up shots, eat up plays, take out opposing team rushes, and give Dahlin really that extra comfort and that feeling that he can just jump into the play whenever he wants to. Now, in the second pairing, it's a little tricky from here because you have Owen Power going into his second year. You like to put him next to a veteran. I've seen some people put Henry Jokiharju in this top spot, but I feel like they're really underestimating what Connor Clifton could bring to this lineup. He fits that same profile that Mattias Samuelsson does. Underrated. Lots of hits, sits back, can have some offensive upside here and there. Clifton was signed by Kevin Adams to be that top 4 partner to Owen Power. If he wasn't, we wouldn't have seen Kevin Adams sign Erik Johnson to the deal that he did, a 1-year, $2 or $3 million deal. We would have seen Kevin Adams make another move for a vintage top 4 defenseman like Noah Hanifin. That hasn't happened, though, has it? No, it hasn't, for all of you that are wondering. And Connor Clifton, they definitely do feel comfortable with Clifton being in a top 4 spot, so I will put him there. And then the bottom pairing will be Erik Johnson and Henry Jokiharju. And Jokiharju, he's just been far too inconsistent to deserve a top 4 spot. He's been given that opportunity to play in that spot for the last 2 seasons, and both seasons has come with mixed results. He's not bad enough to be in the AHL, but he's not good enough to be an elite shutdown defenseman in the NHL. So the third pairing feels right about the sweet spot for him. That feels like the sweet spot for him. And then Erik Johnson, he was brought in to be another veteran leader on the back end. He can go into that final spot. And then the 7th defenseman here for the Sabres, that one was a really tough one to decide because, as you'll see in a couple moments, there is a lot of bubble players that could potentially fill that 7th defenseman spot. And I was tempted by potential rookie Ryan Johnson for that 7th defenseman role, but Kevin Adams brought Stillman in at the trade deadline alongside Jordan Greenway. He may want to go with the veteran, at least at first, over a rookie in the NHL. So that's why I have Stillman as that 7th defenseman. Now let's keep on going to the goaltending. And I think the Sabres, they're going to finally hone in on 2 goaltenders they really like. And that'll be Devin Levi and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. This is a really young tandem. A lot of Sabres fans are going to be very nervous as to how these 2 young goalies are going to perform this season because the Sabres are putting a lot of risk and a lot of eggs in this very young basket here. Devin Levi, of course, looked very good at the end of this past season. The Sabres sent a clear message by starting him in most of the games going down the stretch. And, of course, Devin Levi looked phenomenal in almost all of them. And then Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, he has had his moments this past season. There was moments where he looked really good and only gave up 2-3 goals. There was other moments where he gave up 5 or 6. So with Luukkonen, they're trying to figure out how to tap into a consistency for him, how to figure out how he should better handle rebounds, for example, or watch out for his glove hand, because his glove hand is definitely a weak side for shot-stopping abilities. And the other goalie that was in contention to maybe be that backup goalie, you'll see him right now on the screen, Eric Comrie. He's really had an unfortunate time, I'd say, because he didn't perform that badly. I think Sabres fans really overhated on him, excuse me. He had that one bad game where he gave up 10 goals to the Stars, and there were a bunch of games too where he didn't look phenomenal, but so did Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. The only problem for Comrie is just he hasn't been on the ice all that much. He did not have enough games to vindicate himself. Whereas Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, he had a couple more games to show, hey, I still have promise. With Comrie, that really wasn't the case. And now for everyone else that is on the bubble, I have for forwards Matt Savoy, Zach Benson, Yuri Kulik, Brandon Byro, Brad Murray, Tyson Kozak, Philip Cederquist, and Isak Rosean. Of those forwards, a legitimate shot to make the roster, Savoy, Benson, Kulik, Byro, Murray. That's about it. That's really it for the forwards. Kozak, Cederquist, and Roseanne, they've all performed really good in the AHL, so I wanted to give them an honorable shout-out. But in the end, why these guys didn't make it is for mostly the same reason. They're not as experienced as Rusek outside of Brandon Byro and Brett Murray. Both of them have had limited NHL experience. For Savoy, Benson, maybe Kulik. Kulik of the rookies, of the prospects, the young prospects, he definitely has the best shot to make the roster. For Savoy and Benson, Kevin Adams may be content to just sending them both back to the WHL so that they can get further seasoning because they can't go in the AHL yet this season, which is unfortunate. For Benson and Savoy, they either have to go in the NHL or the WHL for some stupid rule by the AHL. I don't understand the rule. It's something about cutoff dates for birthdays, so it's really weird, but that's the rule. And the Sabres probably don't feel necessarily comfortable to rush them both into the NHL. Let them develop, give them time, let them season and cook a little bit more in the WHL. Maybe they pull Shane Wright at some point in season where they bring him up for a cameo and then send him right back down. Maybe that's the case. For Kulik, he definitely had an impressive AHL season last year. The problem for him is that his defense, his two-way game is still not quite there to the same degree that Rusek does. Kulik wasn't totally responsible. He fits the mold more of Victor Olofsson, kind of. So Kevin Adams, he definitely wants that defense in that fourth-line role. He wants a defensive forward in case Kyle Poso does get injured or tired or needs a scratch or something. So that's why Rusek gets the nod over Kulik. And then I mentioned a little while ago about the defenseman and how it was very difficult to predict who that seventh defenseman could be because there's a lot of guys who could. Cal Clegg, Lawrence Pilot, Ryan Johnson, who I mentioned already, Jeremy Davies, and Jacob Bryson. Now, for Jacob Bryson, a lot of Sabres fans really don't like him. I didn't think he played very good last year either. Where a lot of the young players on the roster took a step forward, Jacob Bryson definitely took a step back. And because of that, we could see him being placed on waivers. And if he's still with the team, he could be in Rochester. He definitely would be in Rochester. Now, for Jeremy Davies, he's going to be a veteran guy in the AHL. Much like in the same breath as Tyson Kozak, Cederquist, and Roseanne, he's on here more as an honorable mention because he did perform well in the AHL last year. But it seems like his ceiling is the AHL with Rochester. And then for Ryan Johnson, I mentioned this already, the Sabres may not feel comfortable in rushing him into the NHL in what will be his first pro season. So he could be waiting around in Rochester for a little while longer. I do like him, though, as a prospect. He could be a very solid bottom pair guy to maybe replace Yoki Ahu someday. And then for Lawrence Pilot, he's been on the bubble for as long as I can remember. There was a couple years where he wasn't even in the Sabres organization. He came back last offseason, didn't quite make the team, performed okay in the few games that he did play with the Sabres as a call-up, but does that mean he gets a full-time spot in the NHL? Probably not. He's very good, though, in Rochester. And then for Cal Clegg, pretty much the same deal as with Lawrence Pilot. There is a couple moments where Clegg did look like he could be the full-time seventh defenseman last season with the Sabres, but consistency really killed him. Consistency did not operate with Cal Clegg. There was a stretch there from January to February to March even where I liked his play. I thought he looked good. But then in April, he kind of was invisible. And before that stretch, he was very invisible. So That's where the Sabres stand. And folks, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Do you agree, disagree with my thoughts on all of this? Who do you think will be making the Sabres opening night lineup? Anyways, I was done. This is Buffalo Sports Center. Check out the videos right next here, right next to my head. I'm looking right over at them. Check them out. Anyways, hope to see you on the next video. Peace out.